Bill is the director of Center for Congregational Excellence for the North Georgia Annual Conference. The last 12 years of ministry in that position, working with small size, medium size, and large size churches. So he has a wealth of information for all church sizes, and helping churches and districts and conferences really think about church excellence and developing leaders. I appreciate that he calls himself the ideator on his Facebook page. He does have a wealth of ideas and resources for us and our local churches as well as our missional hubs. I didn't realize that you had so many books, Phil. There are several more back there, but the two books that we highlighted was an earlier book he wrote with Kay Cotan called The Small Church Checkup, and then his most recent book with Kay was Launching Leaders. Both of these are excellent resources to help us be vital congregations and vital leaders. He has a wealth of information and resources to offer us, and we'll get a wealth of that information this afternoon. Ginger is the pastor at Sycamore Tree here in Maryville. She has a mutual passion to lead faithful, fruitful disciples of Jesus Christ for the transformation of the world. She's also the facilitator and leader for the Blunt West Missional Hub. She brings firsthand experience of the joys and struggles of working with the church leaders in the hub across the growing edges of their churches and discern the needs of the community and to build relationships among churches and within community. She will be offering our Holston response from Phil. So Phil, we're delighted you're here, and we look forward to hearing your ideas.
Here we go. A very simple, great idea is name tags that have the name on both sides. I just have to tell you, how many places do you go where you're trying to figure out half the time if your name tag is put together right? I am now the Director of Congregational Excellence in North Georgia. I used to direct the Office of Congregational Development, or OCD, which was pretty appropriate for me, but they got rid of that title, and now I'm with CCE. We've done the small church checkup, and you can see from my strength finder, ideation is one of the things that I do well. So I hope to give you at least one idea to take home and try in your missional hub or try in your local church. The first slide there, the first book is Small Church Checkup. That's available. It's a diagnosis to help you give to laity, and if you are laity, to read it yourself, and to take a good hard look in the mirror at your local church, and then to come up with some prescriptions to be more excellent in your community. I also have another couple books. One is The Stewardship Journey that helps you walk through a stewardship program. It can be designed for several years, so you don't have to reinvent the wheel every year. And there are other books that go with that. I have a button down there on the right-hand side that says, click here to buy this book and to give to your stewardship team. It's an example of a good button on your website. I go to many of your websites, if you have a website, and they don't tell me what they want me to do. They don't direct me, and I'll give you some excellent examples as we go on of ways to direct the eye on the website. And Launching Leaders is our newest book. We found in going out to many congregations that they have the question, how do we develop new leaders? So this is a 6-week study to help you develop leaders, not just inherit leaders from other churches, but to grow leaders in your own church. And it's got 6 chapters for you to read together, and then 6 lessons that are kind of fun after that. Anybody a fan of Southwest Airlines? Anybody fly Southwest? I'm a fan of Southwest, although I fly Delta most of the time, because of some of the great innovative practices they use. When they want to hire their frontline people, they put 30 to 60 people in a room like this and let each person talk for 5 minutes. At the end of the day, who do they hire? Any ideas? The funniest one, okay? That's a great idea, but that's not it. Not the one that talks the least. Kind of, I think, Bishop, you're right. You're in the right track. The person who is the best listener. They are not paying attention to anything anyone says during their 5 minutes. They are looking at the listeners to see how engaged they are, like you nodding your head, so I'm not up here all by myself. You'd be hireable at the end of the day. And I hope some of you are hireable at the end of the day and have not found yourself in the nap room. One of our companies in North Georgia at the Atlanta Tech Village has a nap room because they realize that people need Sabbath. They need rest, and even during the day, they allow people to come to the nap room. And the guy who owns this company and the company Pardot, I'll talk about in a few minutes, he was rated the best company to work for in Atlanta. Don't you think you need a nap room at your church? Some of you have it. It's called the Sanctuary. I have served all over North Georgia. I served in Lowell, Georgia. Anybody ever heard of Lowell, Georgia? I never heard of it either. The district superintendent said it was 30 miles from Atlanta, and we drove 30 miles, 40 miles, 50 miles, 60 miles from Atlanta, and finally found my student appointment. Served in Gainesville, Georgia. Anybody heard of Gainesville? And then they said, you're going to Stark. I said, that's not the name of a church. He goes, yeah, you're going to Stark. I said, it means empty. It means nothing. It means naked. Stark United Methodist. He said, I'll do you one better. It's in Butts County. Stark Butts. And so my wife said, to ask him where the parsonage is. Well, it was on Big Dam Road. Just up from the Big Dam store, which was the best place in our community to buy beer on Sundays when it was illegal. It was an extra $1 a six-pack, and 50 cents went to Big Ed, who ran the Big Dam store, and 50 cents went to the sheriff, God rest his soul. You can't make this stuff up. When you're living in the shadow of the, sorry, I went the wrong way, in the shadow of the sack of suds where they stole the can of tuna from my cousin Vinny. They said it in Alabama, but it's somewhere between Jackson and Monticello, Georgia. While I was there, we were into multi-site, but we didn't call it multi-site. We called it the Butts Meta Parish. The pastor at Jackson First United Methodist Church and I were in a Doctor of Ministry program at United, and we decided that we were going to try and take that community together by storm and decided to stop duplicating things that were being done by other churches in the community. So I did Tiger Cubs and he did Boy Scouts. I did informal worship, he did formal worship. And if people didn't like what they found in our church, we sent them into town. And if people in town didn't like what they found there, they sent them out to us. We were multi-site before multi-site was cool. In fact, the United Methodist Church has been multi-site before just about anyone. But we have not been complementary in the way that we have worked together. I love this sign. This sign is the result of a vacation Bible school. Anybody ever had vacation Bible school? I walked into this church and I asked them about their vacation Bible school. I'm new there. And I said, tell me about vacation Bible school. They said, well, we have about 25 kids. I said, we have 25 kids on Sunday morning. They said, yeah, we know. Nobody from the community comes to our Bible school. So I said, we're going to cancel it. It's really popular when you're a new pastor, telling them the first thing out of the gate is you're going to cancel Vacation Bible School. And they said, no, you can't cancel Vacation Bible School. I said, we sure enough can. If you're just serving your own kids, it's just an elevated Sunday school. We are not going to spend that time and effort. They said, what do you want from us? I said, why don't you advertise it with the community? Why don't you invite the community to come in? And we found an old sign that they used for yard sales. And we redid it, and instead of yard sale, it said Vacation Bible School, and we had 80 kids from the community show up. One family that showed up had such a great experience, they put a check for $1,000 in the offering plate. And they said, we bring our kids down here to their grandmothers every summer, but this is the first time we've been able to attend your Bible school because we never knew before when it was going to happen. So I went to Ken Callahan. Ken Callahan, if any have ever read his book about the 12 keys to an effective church, he's an excellent strategist. And I said, we put out a sign to advertise for Bible school. I want to put up a new sign out front of my church. And he said, that's stupid. It's really great when you go to a consultant and you give them a great idea and they look straight in your face and say, that is a dumb idea. And I said, what do you mean? He said, you don't need a sign in front of your church. You need a sign pointing toward your church. Go in the community and find the greatest number of traffic hits at any corner that leads to your church and put a sign there. So we took that $1,000 and a few more dollars that we found in an MIA fund. I think it was a ministry investment account, but I called it the Missing in Action account. And we put it together and we put a sign not at the church, but pointing toward the church. And it was a wonderful thing. We went from having 65 people on Sunday mornings to having about 150 people on Sunday mornings over the course of the 4 years that we were there, because we were not hiding our light under a bushel. One of the fellas took me around and he said, preacher, before you got here, we had some highs and lows at this here church, but with you, we're going to find a happy mediocre. I knew he meant a happy medium. But what he said was, with you, we're going to find a happy mediocre. And unfortunately, that is what I find in Methodist church after Methodist church after United Methodist Church, a happy mediocre. Amen. I walked into the church at Grayson that I served most recently, and they had these little new guest cards in the pews. And each of them was copied at a different angle. They had put it on the mimeograph machine, I'm sure, at one time, and it got copied one way and then another. And they were all cattywampus. Is that a word y'all use here? They were all cattywampus, and I sat them down and I threw it down on the table with my evangelism committee, and a woman looked at me in the face and said, they're good enough. I said, ma'am, they need to be good enough for who they're for. She said, for our visitors? I said, no, for the God who sends those visitors. The work we do needs to be good enough for who it's for. Amen? And so we changed those cards and she left the church. But 7 years later, 1,500 new people had used those cards that had been redone. We did them very simply. There's a funny thing that happens when people come to your church for the first time. They like to engage psychologically in an exchange. They will give you something if they can take something back. And so we put together cards that were perforated at the top and had them tear the top off. And we said, take the top off and get some information about us and then hand us the card back. And it was amazing how many people with that sort of exchange gave us their information. And we followed up that day on that information. Everybody knows that, right? There's a half-life on follow-up. If you follow up that day, there's a much higher percentage. And every day you let it go by that you don't follow up, it cuts the percentage in half that they will visit your church again. I see a happy mediocre everywhere I go. Welcome visors. Or this, come be part of our preschool. Or this one. This church was so ashamed when I sent them the picture of this sign, which is for first-time visitors, that they went out and dug them up and put up new ones. I love this. You know, the joy of the Lord is our strength, right? Micah says in the message, take God seriously, but don't take yourself too seriously. And I think that's one of the problems we're having as a church right now. We're not taking God seriously enough, and we're taking ourselves way too seriously. How about this? That's not even safe sanctuary, boys and girls. Or this, whose kids go to the alternative nursery? I'm sorry, but your kids are going to have to go to the alternative nursery today. What is that about? They had an alternative worship service and they sent kids to the alternative nursery. Or this sign that just tells people, stay away, stay away, stay away. It's like a church called the Lighthouse. A lighthouse says, don't come here, danger, they're rocks. But yet people name themselves the Lighthouse. It's like being called First Methodist. Anybody here from First Methodist? What did Jesus say about that? The first shall be last and the last shall be first. I challenge you to change the sign next year and call yourselves Last Methodist and see what God can do in and through you. As an act of penitence, as an act of repentance, become Last Methodist in your community and see what God can do. How about this? thought this was a good idea? Old Yeller dog food. Did you not see the movie? I mean, who's feeding their kid? I'm sorry, not their kid, their dog, Old Yeller dog food. Or this, I went to this church and these are their first time visitor spots. I asked, why are the visitor spots there? They said they were in the shade. On the week before Easter last year, I got a text from the pastor with this picture. She'd pulled him up and thrown in the back of her car. She was tired of waiting. Can I get an amen? And they painted visitor spots so that they could welcome people with excellence. I like what my friend Jason Moore says. He loves this picture. New here, park here. And they're looking for guests because you know the difference. A visitor is someone unexpected. A guest is someone that you've planned for. Or this church. Does this look like anybody's church? We did a Healthy Church Initiative consult with this church, and one of the things we noticed is when you drive by, you can't see their sign because there's a big bush in front of it. So we sat down with the administrative council and we said, one of the things we noticed is there's a big bush in front of your sign. They said, yeah, we know, but it's a memorial. The next time we came back, they had eliminated the memorial bush. Because our purpose needs to be more important than our past. Our purpose needs to be more important than our preference. Those are write-downs for you Emmaus people, right? Our purpose is more important than our preference. Our purpose is more important than our past. Oksana talks about upper room churches and lower room churches. Have you ever heard of those? A lower room church is trying to say that the most important thing we have is our place. And if you change the place at all, people get upset. Or if you change the pastor, people get upset. If you change the program or some people leave, other people say we're going to leave because those are lower room things. And what we are called to be is an upper room church. And an upper room church is driven by vision and purpose, not by people, programs, pastors, or place. You go to a church and they say, don't we have pretty carpet? Don't we have great stained glass? Oh, we even have a garden area. As opposed to saying, would you like to be part of a church that is trying to decrease the divorce rate in these two zip codes? Is that a church worth being a part of? We know that prisons are built in America based on third grade reading levels. They predict using third grade reading levels in your community how many prison beds they're going to need 10 to 15 years hence. And so one of our churches said, we are going to make sure every kid in our local elementary school can read by third grade. That's an upper room church. And you wonder why people don't want to be a part of our clubs. A happy mediocre. Mediocrity does not bring hope. Do you know that? We know that mediocrity does not bring hope. That sign stayed like that after a storm for far too long. We know that excellence brings hope. I went to visit that church, and when I went to visit that church, they said, turn on your flashers if you're here for the first time. And they had people standing outside waiting for me to drive up with my flashers on, and they ushered me to a VIP parking space and then gave me an orange folio about this big. Bright orange folio. Would that work in this community? Bright orange. Does anybody do bright orange? Oh, only Knoxville, not Kingsport. Okay. So they gave me this bright orange folder, and I couldn't put it in my breast pocket. It was too big to jam in most purses. I don't know about yours, but it was too big to jam in most purses. And I walked around with this bright orange folder for the next hour and a half. And how did people treat me? Like a VIP, because they knew that I was a first-time visitor, and they responded with excellence. In many of your churches, you used to have wonderful outdoor greeters. They stood out in front of your churches and they greeted everybody who came up. And then they stopped smoking. And we lost that wonderful group of outdoor greeters who used to greet people in the parking lot. Don't get them to start smoking again, but send them outside to greet people. There's a wonderful church in Athens, Alabama, who's called Friendship United Methodist. It's the best welcome I've ever been to. And they have two people who stand out on the road every Sunday morning waving and getting people to laugh and smile. How much does that cost? Is there any church here that's too small that couldn't have somebody stand out on your road on Sunday and wave at people and give people the joy of the Lord as they go by? You don't even have to dress up like the Statue of Liberty or twirl a sign to do it. You just stand and be friendly. So, one of the questions I want you to ask around your tables when you break, I'm going to go through a lot of different things, is where have you seen excellence in your local church? There's a handout, and it's got some of these things on it. Where have you seen excellence in your local church? Where have you seen excellence in the district? And how are you celebrating and replicating excellence? When you see it, are you celebrating it and telling other people? I go to the gym as every day that I can. I go to a place called Orange Theory, and my coach says this: you did not come here this morning to say the same. You came here to be changed. And isn't that what we should be telling our people? We did not come here to stay the same. We came here to be changed. I got sent to the Grayson United Methodist Church, and when I got sent to the Grayson United Methodist Church, I went to visit the couple who'd been members of the church for the longest. They were not the oldest, and they would tell you, we're not the oldest. We've just been here longer than anybody else. And so on my first day, I went to visit them, and after about half hour of sitting on their back porch drinking iced tea like a good Southern preacher, they looked at me and said, "Don't come visit us again." I said, "Excuse me?" They said, "Don't come visit us again." I said, "I'm new here. It's my first day, and you don't want me to come visit you again?" They said, "If we need you, we'll call you. But otherwise, we want you to spend all your time and energy looking for the people who aren't here yet." I stood in the pulpit my first Sunday. It was the only Sunday I stood in the pulpit because Wesley got kicked out of the pulpit, so I don't know why we stay in it. And I stood in the pulpit and I said, I have it on good authority, Bill and Mary told me, that I'm here for the people who aren't here yet. And if you've got a problem with that, go take it up with them. You can build a church when you have leaders like that, can't you? We're here for the people who aren't here yet, and we need those kind of people who will remind us of that. We came here to be changed. Innovation is change that adds value. It's not just change for change's sake. And most people don't really resist change, they resist loss. I'd like to increase your salary by $10,000. Good to see you. $10,000, right? Is that a change that you could live with? Yes. People are not against change, they're just against loss. And often when we make changes, even if we make them at the speed of Methodism, there can be a loss. There can be a loss. Innovation is change that adds value. And so I want to invite you as a missional hub to dream, but not just your individual dream, but the collective dream of all the people together. Innovation is the implementation of something new. It's not just thinking about it, it's implementing. It's like the old joke, if there are 5 frogs on a log and 3 decide to jump off, how many frogs on the log, Micah? 5. Just because you decide didn't mean you jumped. Like that? Chick-fil-A. I'm following my brother Olu Brown. There is nobody I know who thanks people more than Olu Brown. Did you notice that? I go and I get him to teach a class for me at his church, and he thanks me for bringing the people there. How often do you thank the people just for coming on Sunday morning? It's a beautiful thing, the way that he thanks people. And I had a chance to go to the Chick-fil-A Innovation Center, and I thought it was great fun what they tell people that you ought to do. And I'm wondering if any of your missional hubs do this. Because play is often about breaking the rules and experimenting with convention. Play turns out to be the seedbed for many interventions. How many of your missional hubs play together? I know you pray together. I know you might have a worship service. I know you're working on to collaborate on things. But how many of you play together? You can have all of these slides. We will make them available to you, okay? Hopefully you can use them to teach in your local church. The creation of something new is not something accomplished by the intellect or the mind, but by the play instinct. The benefits of play, problem solving, trust, empathy, social connection. Exploring play is about understanding that innovation can happen when we are driven by enjoyment. Innovation doesn't have to be a serious pursuit. That's why you have fun things on your table, not just to distract you while I'm talking. They're there to get you to think about fun. Play at work can boost creativity and productivity in all ages. And that's why I have to tell you that I was able to transform my last local church by taking older adults to the bathroom. Anybody else have that experience? I went to seminary so that I could drive older adults around in a van and take them to see apples in North Georgia. Can I get an amen? I showed up one day and the driver wasn't there, and they said, "Preacher, you need to drive our older adults, our seasoned saints, or whatever you want to call them this week. You need to take them up to Ella J and Jasper to buy apples, like there aren't any apples in our stores." So I drove them up there, and halfway up, they had to use the restroom. Can I get an amen? And so instead of stopping at the Flying J or the Circle K, I stopped at a church that was 2 iterations ahead of us on the growth curve. And they used the bathroom there. And when they got back on the van, they started saying, "Why don't we have a welcome center?" And I'm like, "I never thought of that. That is such a great idea. Can you help us get that done?" And it was amazing the things that they saw. I took them to another church. We were trying to build a gym, and I took them to another church that had built a gym, and the gym went next to the walls. And every time they looked around and they thought, there's nowhere for people to watch people at the gym. So they came back to our building committee and said, "We need to build a bigger gym. We need to build one that has place for people to watch and is not built all the way out to the walls." What Edwin Friedman, who wrote Generation to Generation in Friedman's Fables, says is that people cannot think their way out of their problems. The only way out of their problems is adventure. Because what adventure does is it gives them new categories in which to think. This is one of my favorite places I've ever traveled in the world. It's the headwaters of the Amazon River. And it's an amazing place where 2 rivers come together. An old, dark, deep river that has been flowing for generations, and a new, rich, fast-flowing river. And they come together and they do not mix for 8 kilometers. You can put your boat in the middle right there, and it'll be pushed back and forth by those competing currents. And I think that's how we sometimes feel as leaders in the church, right? The old and the new are pushing us back and forth. But when the old and the new combine, they move forward with the strength of the Amazon River. If you can get the old and the new to work together in creative ways, if you can get the people who've always been there to celebrate. One of the things that happened at my last church is my old guard said this to me: "Thank God that people are falling in love with the church we've always loved." It's a beautiful thing when God allows the softening of those hearts, and to see that happen. Thank God people are falling in love with the church we've always loved. So I want to invite you to take people on field trips to places that will make them think, and then let them become advocates for change. Because what I find in many of our local United Methodist churches is we have some really fine people, amen? And it's not that they don't want things that are different, they just can't see them. And if you'll take them to other places and allow them to see them, they can help you with change. But otherwise, they will resist change. That's your second line on the handout there. We're talking about breaking through resistance. How do we break through resistance? And one of the ways we break through resistance is helping people to see in new ways by taking them on an adventure. The other way is to help move them out of their depression. I find that a lot of especially our small membership churches, are depressed. And it's not that they don't want to do things. They just feel like they've tried so many things, they don't want to try one more. And they're tired, aren't they? And you're tired. I mean, it's like that lesson when Jethro comes to see Moses and says to Moses, "What you're doing is not good. You will surely wear yourself out, both you and the people with you." And everybody's worn out. And there's new life that is possible. One of the things I want to challenge you to do when you go home is to take pictures of your church, because people are in denial. They are nose and sight blind to the things that are mediocre at your church. I've done this time after time, and I've put up pictures for our trustees, and I've said, "Where's that in our church?" And they're like, "That's not at our church." I'm like, "Yes, it is. When you walk into the narthex, it's right above your head. That ceiling tile that's falling in, it's right there." And it's amazing the transformation that can take place when they see it for themselves. I invite you to practice like a new visitor, walking from the parking lot to the pew and taking pictures of what that's like, and then sharing with your evangelism team, or sharing them with your ad council, or sharing them with whoever might be the relevant people to help you transform from your nose blindness. Because if you want something you've never had before, you must be willing to do something you've never done before. And the way I like to think about that, there's another handout there, and this is for you to be able to fill in. I know people like to fill things in, okay? So you get to fill some things in. The top line is high impact. The bottom line is low impact. The left side is low effort, and the right side is high effort. And what I would like you to go home and think about doing first are some quick wins. Low effort, high impact. People call them low-hanging fruit. There are a lot of different things that people call them. But quick wins can help people move out of their depression. If you have never run a half marathon, trying a half marathon to start will kill you. But if you do a couch to 5K and you start by walking every day and you build up to a 5K, you might someday be able to have the strength to do a half marathon. But you start with something small. A quick win. I was at a church the other day. They have 50 in worship. I preached there, and after I preached there, I met with them to think about their future and to brainstorm some ideas. And one of the people shared with me something I'd never heard about before. Archers for Christ. I did some research, and one small membership church doubled their worship attendance through a bow shooting ministry. Would that work in any of your communities? They're going to have a camouflage Sunday because you can't hide from God, and invite everybody to wear their camo to the church because we can't hide from God. Sometimes a quick win is taking a program that someone else has already perfected, that you don't have to spend a lot of time figuring out all the logistics, and learning from somebody who's already doing Archers for Christ. This church got so excited. There were 3 guys who were incredible bowmen in that church, and they're setting up a thing for target practice, and they're going to invite kids to come. And one of the deals they think they're going to do is that if one of those kids can outshoot them, they get some sort of prize. But if they can't, they have to come to church. And then they come to Archers for Christ to learn to be better shooters. That may not work for every church. Probably not the church that I'm headed to next. But for some churches, that could be a great thing. Another thing that some of our churches have done in North Georgia is Run for God. Has anybody done that here? One person. Becky, is that your name? Yeah. Becky's done it, so you can talk to her about it. But it's a couch to 5K, 12-week Bible study. And the churches that have done it have not done it for themselves, but did it for their community. And invited the community to be a part of that. And then they ended it with a 5K for missions. You see how that all builds on itself? You're teaching people the Bible. You're getting people more physically fit. You're making a difference through community and compassion. So, after a quick win, after you do something that has low effort, then you have the strength to be able to try for some strategic wins. And that's really, I think, the role of a missional hub, to celebrate the quick wins and help other people replicate the quick wins that you're finding, and then getting together and taking a step back. It's what one of our leadership experts says, leaving the dance floor for a while and going up to the balcony. And you go up to the balcony for a while to strategically look at what's going on and what's transpiring below so that you can have some strategic wins. And we have district strategic growth teams. That's kind of perhaps what we might call our missional hubs. We have district strategic growth teams who seek congregational renewal and seek to start new things in our district. This is one of my favorite pictures of congregational renewal from a little church called The Gathering in St. Louis. Guy named Matt Miofsky. Anybody know that name? Matt Miofsky went to the bishop there, Bishop Snazy, and said, I'd like to have a church no one else wants. And Snazy said, there are a bunch of those. Which one do you want? And they gave him one just south of Washington University. It was a church that had closed. And he went in and took out all the pews and cut them up and made altar furniture and a sanctuary cross from the stacked wood of those pews. If you want to test just how much innovation your church is ready for, cut up the pews. Because when Jesus is coming back, he's not coming for the furniture. When people are worried about the carpet more than they're worried about people's transformation, we have a problem. So he cut up the pews and made a cross as a symbol of death and resurrection, because we really are people who believe in resurrection. Maybe we'd be less worried about some of the crisis in our church right now if we really believed in resurrection. I have some stories of resurrection. We started a new church called Oakhurst, and then they changed their name to Eastside, and they ran out of space. They were being charged $11,000 a month. So we went to a church called Martha Brown United Methodist Church in East Atlanta. Do you think it's a black church or a white church? Just a guess. Most people in the community, based on the name Martha Brown, thought it was a black church. All the black people in the community knew it was a mean white church. Are you with me? So people weren't going. There weren't people attending. They were down to a few people, and we offered the chance for them to merge with this new church. What we found out over the years is mergers don't really work like that. They're not equally yoked. And so they went in and renovated the church, renovated the sanctuary, poured all sorts of effort into it, and they had their first worship service on Maundy Thursday. And the people who used to go to Martha Brown walked out in protest because they didn't believe in resurrection. I'm serious. They refused to take communion from the new young preacher who'd been appointed there with his 200 new people. They brought 200 people to the church, and these 10 older folks, mostly older, but not all, people who'd been there for a long time, walked out in protest on Maundy Thursday. They never trusted in resurrection. And so Martha Brown becomes Eastside United Methodist Church. And now they're across from a dance studio. I didn't say that. That dance studio now rents out one of our floors and pays a lot of our bills. Partnerships in the community. Eastside, it's a church that's creative, historic, inclusive, and United Methodist. They are reaching people that church at Martha Brown could never reach. But if we don't believe in new life, it's hard to reach new people. We're doing vital mergers all across North Georgia. Y'all familiar with the concept of vital mergers? What happens with a merger is you take a church with 75 people, and you take another church with 75 people, and you make one group move to the other church. In a year or two, how many people do you have? 75 people, because it's like moving into her house after the divorce, right? I mean, it just doesn't work well. But what vital mergers do is something quite different. What a vital merger does is it pushes you to have a pioneering spirit. It pushes you to say that the purpose of the church is more important than the place. And what we do with 2, 3, 4, and sometimes 5 local churches is we get them all to close and sell. Does that give you the creeps just a little bit? They get them all to close and sell. And then they move to a new location with a new leader to plant a new church together. Not to merge existing churches, but to take the resources and the people from those churches to create a vital merger. The first one is Neighborhood Church, where my daughter goes. We sold a building in downtown Atlanta for a pretty good sum of money. And we closed another church, renovated it, and reopened it. And they have 300 and some people on a weekend there at Neighborhood Church, where they were having 2 churches of 40 and 20. It's a marvelous story of resurrection. Covenant is another similar story where we sold a building and renovated another. Connections at Metropolitan is a crazy story. I went and preached at one of our historic African American churches, and when I preached with them, they invited me to come back and talk to them about their preferred future. What was God's preferred future for them? And they struggled really trying to make ends meet. And then they told me about another church down the street from them that was having the same problem. So I went and talked with the people at that church. They had a big community meeting with both churches, and I told them about this vital merger concept before the district superintendent even knew. Any DSs in here? Before the district superintendent even knew, the Bowen United Methodist Church, and I'm having a hard time recalling the name of the other one, had put out for sale signs. And before any of us knew it, they had contracts on both those buildings. We didn't even know where they were going to go, but they were ready. And they finally sold both those buildings, and we gave them the old Stewart Avenue building on Metropolitan Parkway, and now they're connections at Metropolitan, and they took the money from the sale of those buildings to renovate the old space. And they planted a new church with the resources. Has that got your juices flowing a little bit? Is there anywhere that could possibly happen in your communities? We had Union County in North Georgia. Blairsville, anybody know that area? They had 5 rural churches all sell and close and reopen as the first United Methodist Church of Union County. Can you imagine all the churches in your county closing and get together and starting something new in the name of Jesus Christ? Would that send a message to your community? Am I crazy? Yes, but that is not the point. And then we did another crazy thing. We closed a Wesley Foundation that was struggling, and we closed the church next to it that was struggling and reopened them as one ministry with a church planter who is reaching young people by the handful. It's a beautiful thing, a vital merger. This is how they voted for a vital merger at one of our churches at Covenant. They gave everybody a chance to pull a Post-it note. And if you were against it, you got a red Post-it note. If you thought it was okay, you got a yellow Post-it note. If you thought it was a great idea, you got a green Post-it note. And you put it up there and voted for what you thought needed to happen. I love these yellow people that are just trying. And they just did that as a straw poll. And you can use that for other things in your church. It doesn't have to be for a vital merger, but sometimes you can get the pulse of the congregation before you take a vote that will help you to know how you're doing and where you're headed. This church that my daughter goes to, they have these great things on the back of the pews. Hi, neighbor, we're so glad you're here. And then they put these T-shirts together, all love, but no Bible study. I've been getting on to them about that. I think they need to have Bible study. We also have missional mergers. We have had churches that have been taken over as a second campus, not to be a second worshiping place, but to be a missional hub in that community where they have Boy Scouts, where they have feeding ministries, where they have dinner church, where they host Hispanic ministry. And it's been an amazing thing for large churches to take over a second place as a missional hub like the Tillman House. We also have a New Church Leadership and Innovation Academy that we've sponsored as an annual conference. And we used to do it with Candler School of Theology, but we took a year off from that. But we have one Monday a month where we go to people like Olu and they teach people who are interested in starting new things about kind of some of the things you guys learned from him today. And they spend a day learning from Olu. They spend a day learning from our best church planters. They spend a day learning from some of our large church pastors. And it's a wonderful thing. And the reason I put this guy up here, he is at a historic First Church in Covington, Georgia. And he decided that he would bring his whole staff to our New Church Leadership Academy every month. And he said it transformed the way they thought about their staff. So innovation is not just to start new churches. Innovation is to help existing churches start new things, to stimulate the creativity. And what he's got on the wall back behind him is their why. On the wall in his office is their disciple-making process. Do you know why it's on the wall in his office? So that anytime someone comes to visit with the pastor, he'll stop and say, "Oh, you guys are coming here to get married? You know, I'm here to do your premarital counseling. While you're here, I'd like to tell you about our disciple-making process." It's amazing how that has helped transform that staid downtown church. It's where they filmed in the heat of the night. Anybody watch that? Covington, Georgia. We've done some mergers. The first merger we did didn't work. Trinity at the Well, it's not working. We're having to move one of the two pastors that were put there. Mergers have not worked well for us. We've tried another new one because people just want to keep trying to do something that doesn't work. Okay, we got City on a Hill and Woodstock merging. I'm hopeful because of the leadership there. Their names are Andy and Ann, so we got them Raggedy Ann and Andy dolls to kind of get started. This one at Austell has been magic, though. It was a small, struggling African-American church at Smith Chapel whose building had come into disrepair, and a diverse church at Austell First that has a Hispanic pastor. And they have found the right combination of things and are reaching their community creatively for Christ. And that is one I am hopeful about. I don't want to be right about this merger. Second campuses. We've helped large churches find second campuses. And my favorite one is the middle one. It's called the Outpost. The Outpost was the child of two churches, one a county seat, one a rural church out in the county. And those two pastors had been working and praying together and said, you know, there are people in this community that just are never going to come in our doors. We've got a great building in the country. We've got a great building in town. And there are people who are never going to come visit us. So they started a worship service together. They started a worship service together called Outpost Church in the local high school. There's some 200 strong now, and they've been baptizing. If that's too much for you to think of, what if you would add an Easter service? What if your missional hub added one Easter service at an early time period at your local high school? Is that something you could try? Is that something worth trying? There are enough of you probably in a missional hub that don't have an early worship service that you could add an early worship service at a local school and see what God can do in and through you. Because you know what God says, I love you just the way you are.
I love you just the way you are.
But when you take the relationship, I love you too much to let you stay the way you are. Isn't that true? That's what God does. God calls each of us to more than we're already doing. Raise your hands in the air as high as you can. Now raise them higher. Everybody does that because you all have the capacity for more than what you're using. Outpost Church. It was two churches, a rural church and a first church, getting together and saying, we're not going to reach people. We're not going to just get people to come to us. Parachute drops, we've tried those. One of my favorite parachute drops is called the NET, Nations Experiencing Transformation Together. It is a multi-ethnic, multicultural church in Gwinnett County that only meets 3 Sundays a month. And they're growing like wildfire. Have you ever thought about meeting just 3 Sundays a month? They meet in the church 3 Sundays a month, and then they have a mission Sunday outside of the church 1 Sunday a month, and I'll tell you a little bit about that. Yes, sir.
What's a parachute drop?
Oh, sorry. A parachute drop is when you take someone, thank you for clarifying that. A parachute drop is when you just take a pastor and send them to an area and say, start a church. No mother church, no sister partnership, no multi-site. And it used to work when we were having a lot of new housing starts in some places. And it worked well in the 70s, 80s, and 90s. But it costs a lot of money and really hasn't worked very well. The second one there, called The Fountain, we started a new church in an area, and they've not been able to move out of the elementary school because there's no land that they can afford in that area. They got to about 200, and they can't really break much more of a barrier because they have to set up and tear down in their 7th year in an elementary school. That's a parachute drop. The parachute drop of the net is really interesting. They were supposed to have 12 mothers. There were supposed to be 4 churches that sent them money. There were supposed to be 4 churches that sent them people. And there were supposed to be 4 churches that prayed for them. And everybody agreed to do it, like those frogs on a log, Micah. And the pastor, Rodrigo Cruz, will tell you, I think some of them prayed for us. But none of them really sent money, and none of them sent people. So it was supposed to have 12 mothers, but they ended up being a parachute drop. But they have figured out how to do it because they want to create a ministry they want a church that looks like their local schools on Sunday morning. It's like my last church. I said, if you don't like diversity, you're not going to like heaven. And they laughed just like that. And then I said, if you don't like diversity, you're probably not going. They didn't think it was as funny. It just happens to be true. We give leadership supplements. We've had some places that need the right leader, and so we've supplemented them. A church like St. Paul Summit Street in Gainesville, the church was about to go on equitable comp. It was our only African-American church in that community, and we sent a fine young leader that they couldn't afford, and the conference supplemented it because we knew it was a growth area. A young man named Robert King has come to my committee this week and asked for money to help start another worship service because they've grown so much. Because we knew an area needed new leadership. They didn't need a new church. They needed new leadership, and they couldn't afford it. So the conference came alongside them. I may be meddling here. Where's the bishop? She's gone, so I'm good, right? So I may be meddling, but we also have paid for associates of color to go into churches. These were mostly large white churches in communities that were diverse, and we've sent 2 African Americans and one Korean associate into those places. We've done incubators. One of the things that we know about church growth is our explosive growth in North Georgia has come from 3 sources. People who've been associates in large churches, people who were preachers' kids and learned at their mama or daddy's knee, and people who've started recovery ministry. Those are the 3 ways we've found explosive growth. You with me on that? I am. And what we found in North Georgia was when I came into the conference, we had 30 African American associate positions. And now we're down to 5 or 6 full-time associate positions for African Americans. And so there weren't great places. Olu Brown was the associate pastor at Cascade United Methodist for 5.5 years before he got explosive growth by starting something new, because he had to learn the systems of a large church in order not to just create one more small church. Partnerships with large churches, and this is a great story. We did a partnership with a small church, and this is what it looked like. But they closed the church before they tried to reach the community. It was called New Hope United Methodist. They closed the church for 3 months, and all the pastor did, no worship services, all the pastor did was walk around and meet people in the community and ask the question, what do you think, Monty, would bring new hope to this community? What do you think, Ginger, would bring new hope to this community? And they went around and asked people what would bring new hope. That person spent all their time immersed in the community. And they met all sorts of people, and they relaunched back in September of 2018, and they redid the church, but they didn't have to pay for it because one of the people that they met was a wedding planner, and she paid for the paint to redo the building because for an exchange of allowing them to use it as a wedding chapel. Community partners. Conversation with community partners. I have to tell you, though, it didn't work. We're closing it. We tried. you're going to try new things, and you're going to fail at some of them. But we water and we plant, and yet God gives the growth. So, new methods. One of the new methods that I want to recommend is not a new method at all. When I invite someone to plant a new church in North Georgia, the first thing I ask them to do is to meet 20 new people every week. I sat down with the first group of church planters and said, you need to meet 20 new people a week. You need to get their name and get some of their story. And they told me that was ridiculous. 6 weeks later, I sat down and had coffee with this young couple. I had made them meet 40 people a new week because there were 2 of them. And they sat me down at Starbucks at Piedmont Park and said, why didn't you tell us about that 20 new people a week thing? I said, what do you mean? They said, when we were serving in an existing church, if we had been out in the community meeting 20 new people a week, it would have transformed our ministries. How many of your SPRs hold you accountable for the number of new people you meet a week? And then you have to follow up with 6 one-on-ones where you sit down with that person and you say, I want to hear your story. And after I hear your story, I pray for you if you'll let me. You may not even be a religious person, but I hear your story and then say, you know this community better than I do. Who else do I need to meet? And you start a network of connection, and then you start net weaving, which is connecting people to each other, not connecting people to you. And the beautiful thing that happened with this new church start, that's neighborhood church that I talked about a little earlier, they started connecting their neighbors to each other because they were meeting 20 new people a week. What I'd like you to do right now is just turn to a neighbor and talk to them for a moment about one thing you heard that could be helpful for you and for your church or for your missional hub. Turn to a neighbor and discuss among yourselves. Math over here is saying that's 80 new people a month. Yes, it is. And if 1% of them came to your church, would that help your church? Too often we've been serving our church and not serving our parish. We've made the parish our world instead of the world our parish. We do a district innovation lab, so we take the kind of work that you do today and we do it with districts. I love what this church did. They defined their mission field. They said 263,000 people live within 10 miles of where you're standing. They all matter to Jesus, they all matter to us, and so do you. Some of our best churches remind themselves of their best selves by using their walls. Because we leak, don't we? And they use the walls to retell the story. What I do know is 10 miles is too big. If you want to use Mission Insight to understand your community, we suggest in the Southeast an 8-minute drive. And you can pull up very easily an 8-minute drive on Mission Insight. You just get on to Mission Insight and you look for an 8-minute drive. And what we're looking for just from your worship attendance is a 1% penetration at minimum. If you are not worshiping 1% of an 8-minute drive, then your church may have some issues that need to be dealt with. 2% is great. 3% is excellent. 14% is what Olu Brown has. Isn't that incredible? He started a church in a declining area of Atlanta and was able to engage 14% of the population in an 8-minute drive around his church. I throw that out as a challenge to you. One of the things we do to help our local churches who are struggling with their worshiping percentages is we send out mystery worshipers like secret shoppers, and I hear y'all do some of that as well. No? Yeah, we send out secret shoppers to your church. And we'll send a slew of them. One of our churches, one of our large membership churches had declined by 700 in attendance. And they did not understand why. And so we sent a series of mystery worshipers to them. And the senior pastor reviewed it at CFNA the other day and said it was one of the most brutal experiences of my ministry. Because visitors came and didn't know us, and they put up a mirror that people couldn't deny. Because that's what happens, is that you as pastors, any pastors in here? You as pastors sometimes go and try to tell your church that things need to change, and they're in denial. But it's very different when you get a written report from 3 mystery worshipers who've been to your church, and they say your people are not friendly. I've never heard a church tell me, I said, tell me about your church. They never say we're cold and cliquish. The first thing they say 9 times out of 10 is that we're friendly. We're friendly to each other. To each other. So we do mystery worship reports, and we can send you that. You can download the stuff off our conference website. One of the things that I find really good is to get some of your leaders to go mystery worship somewhere else and feel how awkward it is. And they will come back and push you to change things because they have now experienced the awkwardness of going somewhere else. Many of your people haven't visited anywhere else in a long time, and they don't know what it's like. And so you send them out as mystery worshipers and use that against them. Can I get an amen? So, low impact, low effort, those are time traps. Those are time traps. Those are things that you think are going to be helpful, and you spin your wheels doing that low effort thing. All this doesn't take a lot of effort, but it doesn't make any difference. So, time traps, and then high effort, low impact, I call soul sapping. They just take so much out of you. I was in a meeting the other day, and one young pastor looked at the district superintendent and said, "This is Groundhog Day. We've been having the same meeting in the district so many times. I'm just not coming anymore." That's a pretty bold statement, isn't it? It's easier when your DS is retiring, but it's still a pretty bold statement. Because he was not going to participate anything that was soul sapping. He wanted to be spending time in things that were life-giving. So I want to throw some great ideas out here on the table. I love name tags that are big enough for people to see without me being awkward. I love this district superintendent who gives out shirts to dogs. They have a blessing of the animals, and then they give out dog t-shirts to promote the United Methodist Church. How many of your dogs need a t-shirt? There you go. This church teaches Scripture to their children at the drinking fountain. This church puts out signs when a new baby comes with the stork welcoming our newest member. Sorry, this is Olu's church. They make first-time visitors a priority, and they have their own entrance for first-time visitors. And everybody who goes through that entrance is welcomed like the dog from Up. "Hey, I just met you and I love you." That's what I want every greeter to be like. I want them to be like Doug and Up. "I've just met you and I love you." If you haven't seen the movie, you need to do it. This is a rural church that knows its community. And they use what God has given them, the resources God has given them, to tell their story. Why do we fish with worms? Because fish like the taste of worms. It might leave a bad taste in your mouth or some of your people who think we should do things a certain way. But we fish with worms because fish like the taste. Unfortunately, where are my fisher people in this place? Tell me what's wrong with that picture. That's a sea trout, and it doesn't eat worms. So you have to know your context. I was serving in a fishing village, and I was preaching one of my sermons that is entitled, "God Wants You to Fish Every Day." Jesus wants you to fish every day. The children's minister was amazing. She came out with a fishing pole with a live worm at the end. And she stood there, and the kids came up, and they said, "What are you doing?" She said, "I'm fishing." They said, "You can't fish in here." She said, "No, that's how United Methodists fish." We sit in the sanctuary with the live worm on the end, and we hope that some fish will come in our sanctuary, and if that bait doesn't work, we'll just change baits, and we just sit here waiting for them to come in. And the children said, "You can't fish here." She said, "Why not?" They said, "You've got to go where the fish are." And she dropped the mic. And is that the best children's sermon ever? Who's going to use that? My other favorite children's sermon, I've written books on children's sermons. My other favorite children's sermon is when you hand kid 10 apples. Have you done this? You have a kid standing there and you just hand them 10 apples. Do you know how hard it is to hold 10 apples? You cannot hold 10 apples. And the kid's sitting there trying to hold 10 apples and you say, how many does God want back? And he'll often say, all of them, which is great. Or 2, which is even, that works too. And I'll just say 1. And we'll put one of those apples on the altar and you still have more than you can hold. I knew you'd take at least one idea home, right? See, there's one. But we fish with worms because if you keep doing what you've always done better, you'll fail faster in a new economy. Think through your week. Are you spending your time on things that bring impact? Or are you spending your time on things that are time traps and soul sapping? One church just put in their bulletin, have you considered leaving a gift to your church in your will? You remember that couple that I told you about who told me that I was there for the people that weren't there yet? We did a wills workshop, and that couple came, and they decided to leave everything they had to the church. It's only $2.8 million. Nobody had any idea that they had that kind of money. If you ever want to be really popular in a community, talk about tearing down a historic building. Anybody ever done that? You've done that? We just burned one. Well, okay, fair enough. You got an arsonist here, Bishop. You need to pay. We had an old building that was supposed to be historic, but saying it's historic is like saying that you own George Washington's axe, but it's had 7 new handles and 8 new heads. It was not historic. It was full of rodent feces and mold. It was a sick building. You can only stay in that building for maybe 10 minutes if you had asthma. And so where did I make them meet to talk about it? In that building. And we met in that building and everybody said their piece about what we should do. And that old couple, Bill and Mary, came up to the front of the church. It reminds me of the great devotional we had last night from Charles. And they stood at the front of the church holding each other up. They're both in their 90s. And I said, isn't that a beautiful picture of the church? He's holding her up and she's holding him up. Isn't that what church should be? And she said this, we would be so sad for this building to be torn down. And I thought, we're done. No more discussion. And then she said words that are forever etched in my memory. We'll be so sad to see this building torn down, but we wouldn't be sorry because it's the people of this church we love and not this building. You can build a church around people like that. One of our churches always puts kids up and says, how many think that's a cute baby? Raise your hand. And whoever's got their hand raised, he said, we need people in the nursery. If you think that's a cute baby. This church took over a Mexican restaurant, but they were good stewards. They didn't paint the whole wall. They just repainted the Corona bottles. Got my toes in the water. This church is celebrating what they're doing well. When I told you to find things, quick wins that we celebrate, they've been open for 40 months. They've had 40 baptisms. And they tell that story. We need to have stories that are worth telling. What are you praying for is a great wall in that church. This woman just seemed so happy to welcome me. They gave her a t-shirt and she just loves being there. You want to look for people who love being there. At my last church, we had the same stupid greeters every Sunday. And I went to them and I said, in most real churches, you have first Sunday greeters, second Sunday greeters, third Sunday greeters. And they said, you don't understand. We're the greeters. It's our spiritual gift. We come here early. We pray over all the pews and who's going to be sitting here. We make sure everything is right in the pews. And we are the greeters. We're going to be here every Sunday. We know who's here and we know who's not here. And I thought, okay. But when I go and visit with people, they would tell me that the best first impression was those greeters. And when children were baptized, I'd say, who do you want to have come stand with you? And they would say, our greeters. It was a beautiful thing. Greeters. I go to Orange Theory. They knew I was coming. They put my name on the sign before I got there. Do you know that? Do you know who's coming? I'll give you a way to do that a little later in my presentation. Red Wine Cafe, I love what he did with Wesley. Drink all the coffee you can with all the people you can in as many places as you can so that the love of Jesus Christ can be shared where relationships are built. Isn't that beautiful? And right there on their wall, they're telling you their mission. We gather together so relationships can be built. This church created a playground for children in their sanctuary. Jesus said, "Let the children come to me. Do not hinder them, for to such belongs the kingdom of God." Another church, instead of just using Facebook for prayer concerns, started a prayer app. Peachtree Road started a prayer app. Another church, I thought this was brilliant with all the flu that's going around. They put together these little Kleenex packets that said, "God bless you." And on the back, it had all the information of the church. And they sent their people out with them. And everywhere they went in recent days, they would hand you a packet of Kleenex and say, "God bless you. Here's a gift from our church. We hope that next time you don't sneeze on me, sneeze into one of these." But it was just a beautiful thing that they did. So simple. We were in England recently, and they do toilet twinning. I never heard of this before, but it says that 1 in 3 people worldwide don't have a toilet, so they don't charge people to use their toilets. They ask for a donation so that someone in rural Africa can have a toilet. I love this. This is going into Westminster Abbey. And when they redid the front of Westminster Abbey, you know how historically we've always used space and architecture to teach? But when they redid the front of Westminster Abbey, do you notice the 2 main figures in the middle? It's hard to see maybe, but it's Dr. Martin Luther King with a child at his feet, and it's Archbishop Romero with a child in his arms. Isn't that beautiful? So why don't we use our space better? This church is the one at Eastside. They use their space to tell their story. Isn't that great? You have wonderful palettes to paint on at your church that you're not using. I would invite you to take a picture as you drive up to your church. Your church sign may not be the best way to tell your story. You might need a banner down the side of your church to better tell your story, because that's the sight line that people drive up to. This is a prominent corner in Atlanta, in East Atlanta, and everybody who drives by sees that. They have a terrible little sign, but this is the way they get their information out about Easter Sunday and everything else. They also paint every Sunday. They have somebody who paints every Sunday. So while the person is preaching, there's someone painting. There's an artistic expression every Sunday during worship. And they even use their Pentecost projector. They make everything beautiful. They have a prayer wall where you can take a prayer, leave a prayer. They have a knitting ministry to give people's hands something to do during worship. This is one of our other churches that made beautiful banners. And I love the screen in this church. Can you see the screen? It's below the stained glass window. You only know it's a screen when it's lit. This church also created a parking team because they wanted the community to think the church was bigger than it was. So they had these 3 crazy guys who stood out front with, waving people in, even if you weren't coming to church. They were just waving people in. They put smiles on faces. They shared joy, and they made people think the church was bigger than it was. First-time guests, turn on your flashers. Great first-time guest sign. Senior adults, expectant mothers, parents with infants. One church did pop-up worship, and they took it out in the community. Another one of our churches just did this thing in their sanctuary. What grows your faith? It's just going too fast. What feeds your soul? And everybody, whenever they were doing something significant, they put that up and filled the tree a couple falls ago. So in order to change, you need to start something. In order to change, you need to stop something. I remember when I first moved down to the South, I walked out. I had this guy doing work in my yard because I'm not good at it. And I came out, and he'd taken these bushes and cut them down to a nub. And I said, "You've destroyed him." And he said, "Preacher, that's how them crepe myrtles work. Sometimes we need to prune in order to get strong growth. In order to change, you need to stop something." That's the hardest thing to do in the church. It's the hardest thing to do in the church is to stop something that no longer has life. One church put an arena of fun outside because they wanted people to stay around longer. You know how healthy a church is if people stay around longer after a worship service and don't stay around longer after a heated meeting. I was in a administrative council meeting one day. This same older couple, we were fighting about whether the Boy Scouts should get to use the church van. It took an hour. And at the end of the hour, the chair of the board said, all those in favor, and almost everyone raised their hand except for that older couple. And they said, all those against, and she raised her hand, then she hit her husband, and he raised his hand. And then there was one young man across from them who didn't vote, who voted with them. And I stopped the meeting, and I said, explain to me what just happened. And the young man said this, those two people are the two wisest people in this church, and however they vote, I'm going to vote. But I'm going to tell you something right now. We didn't win the day, and you'll never hear about that from us outside this meeting because we love our church. What a great concept, actually having the meeting inside the meeting. This church was tired of people spilling their coffee, but instead of being mean, they decided to have some fun with it. Forgetting something, hint, a lid. Please drink responsibly. Use a lid. If you liked it, you should have put a lid on it. The men of the church put together this table for the mothers for Mother's Day. Great table full of chocolate. One of our churches was trying to create anticipation for Christmas Eve, and they took a tree in their narthex and covered it up with black tarp and put a big sign on it, not to be open till Christmas Eve. Every group that came into their building during the Advent season saw that. And kids are like, Mom, we have to come back Christmas Eve. We cannot miss Christmas Eve. We've got to come back Christmas Eve. And on Christmas Eve, they opened it up, and it was full of these bags. They weren't filled yet. They were empty, and they were all just hanging there. And everybody who left the Christmas Eve service got one of these bags. Because what people want to do is they want to be part of something in community, and they want to make a difference with compassion. And so they gave these bags out Christmas Eve, and they said, during the Christmas season, if you want to make a difference, fill them up with canned goods and bring them back on Epiphany Sunday. Like the kings brought their gifts, you bring your gift back on Epiphany Sunday. So it got people who visited on Christmas Eve to come back a second time. And then they use them all throughout the rest of the year. Give love. By this everyone shall know that you are my disciples. And they have a place to hang them and do donations of a different kind all year. Thought it was a great idea. Another church did sippy cups with logos. And they handed out sippy cups at the elementary school, saying, we want children in our worship service. This church put out signs that said, it's a boy for Christmas. But the issue is, people aren't buying that, y'all. They know it's Snellville United Methodist. They're not going to Google that. But one of our smart Wesleyan churches in my community, they do this. Intrigued? You're going to Google it while you're driving right behind them, aren't you? And people would Google it. It's on all their cars. They advertise their sermons on the cars because people spend too much time in their cars. And it takes them to a website about how everybody pushes buttons and then advertises their newest sermon series. Brilliant way of thinking differently. And they even did it for a Just Married series. So they got everybody to decorate their card like they just got married. But that's advertising a sermon series at 12 Stone Church. It's a Wesleyan church. Yeah. One of our churches wanted to change people's spending habits for Advent. It was a small membership church, Fields Chapel, and they made MasterCards to put in the front of your wallet for Advent. It was a great idea, and what they were trying to do was to change people's spending habits. So on the Sunday before Black Friday, they gave out MasterCards for Advent and said, put this in front of your credit cards and ask yourself before each purchase, do I need this item? Can I afford it? Under what conditions was the product made? Where will the product end up? And is there a significant gift for the birthday boy Jesus on my list? And then on the back side, they had the information about all their Christmas Eve services. Simple, right? Inexpensive, but it's a way to help people change their behavior and grow in their discipleship, which is what we're trying to do. These are two of my favorite ideas as I get close to being done, as we try to invite people not into a virtual reality, but into a vital ritual reality. My dad was killed by a 16-year-old kid driving too fast. He was 61 years old. When I moved to the Grayson community, 3 girls were killed in a car accident as one girl overcorrected and killed herself and 2 of her friends. They came to me and said, what are we going to do about this? And I said, we're going to get traffic islands put down the road toward the high school to slow kids down. They said, yeah, but what is our church going to do? I said, I don't know. What do you want to do? And this woman said, I want to bless kids' driver's license. And I said, well, what would that look like? Because you worry. She said, well, a kid would take their driver's license out and they would put it on the altar and they would recite the 10 Commandments. I will not commit adultery in this car. I will not... I will honor my father and mother. I will not covet my neighbor's ride. I will not steal my parents' keys. And I said, I love the idea. I'm just not sure that the 10 Commandments part needs to be there. So Sunday after Sunday, somebody would raise their hand and say, Pastor Phil, can I have my driver's license blessed? And they would come down and kneel at the altar. And the parents and the youth leaders and anybody else who wanted to would come and surround them, and we would pray for them to be safe drivers. We have rituals for kids when they're 12. It's called... We have rituals for kids when they're 18. It's called... And we wonder why we lose them in between. We don't have a vital ritual for kids at one of the most scary times for parents. Anybody got a 15 or 16-year-old? How would you feel if the church said, we'd like to pray for your child and bless their driver's license and call them into more account? It was a beautiful thing. It was a beautiful thing. Blessing of the driver's license. The other thing, and this ties to my family life as well, my dad was adopted, and every Advent we do a celebration of adoption. We celebrate the life of Joseph and the gift that he gave to Jesus. And we bring in people, we bring in an adoption agency. We bring in people who've given up a child for adoption. We bring in people who have been adopted themselves. Bring in parents who tell the story of adopting children. And it's a beautiful, beautiful Sunday. The best one ever, though, was one year this woman told the story of giving her child up for adoption, and there wasn't a dry eye in the house. But imagine a year later when her daughter found her, and she brought her to Advent worship. How do we invite people into a vital ritual reality? One of our new churches is really smart. They buy the URL on the internet for whatever event is coming up. Christmas in Grovetown. The name of the church is Quest. Do you see their name in that at all? They just put out signs all around the community that say, celebrate Christmas in Knoxville. Celebrate Christmas in Kingsport. People Google that and it drives them to your church as opposed to, say, come to Trinity. And what they do is they drive people to that website, and they have had the highest Easter and Christmas attendance in their history. It's great marketing. One of our churches decided that they wanted everybody in a small group, so they put the name of everybody in their church on a Post-it note and created new small groups until they had everybody in a small group. Because what we know is that people come to church for a variety of reasons, but they stay because of deep, meaningful relationships. And where do you find deep, meaningful relationships? Not in worship, but in small groups. And so they wanted to make sure everyone, so they created this, what they called a war room, and they made sure everybody had a small group. And if they didn't have a small group, they started new small groups. The Net Church I was telling you about before, they only worship in the building one Sunday a month. They have a mission Sunday one Sunday a month. Their vision is a church that can reflect on Sunday the diversity of our school systems Monday to Friday. And their mission Sunday, Christianity is not about what we say inside a building, but about what we do outside of it. Closing the doors of a church is not the end of the world, but the beginning of new life for people. Do you know who they meet on Sunday mornings when they're not at church? People who are not in church. What a crazy concept. All the people they interact with are unchurched. And leaving the church on Sunday is more than a nice idea. It's a response and obedience to our call. You get the idea. You can watch it when they send it, when you get the videos, right? But they do a great job, and they do something to bless their community for Christ in Judea, in Jerusalem, in Judea, in Samaria, and to the ends of the earth. They've opened their third campus now because things have gone so well. And guess who paid for the third campus? the local police department renovated our third campus. They have a police department there, they have a homeless shelter, and they have a worshiping community, and we didn't spend the money. Community partnerships. We have not because we ask not, the scriptures tell us. And this is what happened at the Net over Christmas. They put together a manger scene, and when the winds came and blew the manger scene over, what happened? The cross caught it. Can't make this stuff up. One of our other churches, they bought, some of you won't know what this is. This is a pint glass that people put beer in. And they decided they were looking at a different target audience. So they got a pint glasses and gave them out to all the bars in the community and said, occasionally, would you pour a beer in a pint glass that has our name on it? Open hearts, open minds, open containers, the people of the United Methodist Church. Susan might not have me back, I guess. But there was one family who ordered a Newcastle, and he got his beer, and he looked at it and said, what? And then he had an expletive, is Chapel Roswell. And his wife said, I don't know, let's Google it. They Googled it, and he said, that's a church? Any church that has the guts to advertise in a pint glass, we're going. They joined the church, they got their kids in the preschool, and they started being a part of our Russian bridge to ministry, to missions. If you don't like that idea, we have coffee cups. Tattoo Parlor Church, fresh expression of church. You heard about that. Some of y'all were a part of that. We have one called Love on Tap that works at that meets at a local brewery and does missions at a local brewery. Messy Church, if you're not familiar with that movement, it's a way for people to physically interact with their children, with families. Messy Church is church for all ages, celebrating together with food, crafts, games, music, and more. I was at Wesley's Memorial Church in Epworth, England, and that is how they have revived their church, by doing Messy Church, that is interactive worship for families. Check it out if you haven't seen it. Some people call it hands-on church because some people don't like messy. One church did a dirt bike church. Another did a wing church, where they had wings, a conversation community, and chicken wings. Another did dinner church. This is one of my favorites. We had church in North Georgia with 4 members. And they started a dinner church, and they reached 35 people every month with their dinner church, although there are only 4 people in that church. When 2 or 3 are gathered, conflict is sure to follow. No, that's not right. We have a kid named Daniel Ogle. Anybody heard his name? We stole him for a little while. And he is starting a second campus for one of our large churches. And he went to a gym, and the guy said, I've been waiting for you to come. He doesn't even work out. He does now. He does now. We're getting Daniel in shape. And he showed up at a gym, and the guy said, I knew God was going to send you to me. And now they do a Saturday morning 45-minute free workout with Bible study. And he's building a second campus for one of our large churches in one of our fast-growing young adult communities. Isn't that beautiful? Hopeful? This is a terrible story. This is a church that put on Bible school and nobody showed. They did a vacation Bible school and nobody came. So they said, to heck with that, we're going to take our Bible school to the local nursing home. We do a worship service there and about 12 people show up. Now they take vacation Bible school to that local nursing home and they have 30 people show up because they want to do something physical and interactive. They just don't want to sit and soak. Older adults who love the joy of vacation Bible school and crafts and so much fun. This church said, okay, we're not going to be defeated. We're not going to be depressed. We're not going to take this as the end. We just have put it in the wrong place. Another church has Cerveza Sunday at a local brewery where they have a service project and a brew. I just wanted to change your mindset really quickly about this. This church's website says, learn more about us, learn more about the portico. Our best church websites are not about us, but are about the people who are searching for God. And they say things like this: plan your visit. Who's that about? It's about the person searching. They have a next click where they have a video about the church. Let us know you're coming. And then when you hit let us know you're coming, there's a form to fill out that is like making a reservation to go to church. And they also have all the information about your children, so they, like Orange Theory, can say and have people waiting for you to get there. One of our churches, you'll get to read this. There's a great visitor survey that is in this PowerPoint, and you can check that out. It's really a wonderful thing. This is one of the churches in Alabama that is called Cornerstone, and everything is done in threes. This is the beautiful water bottle they gave me, and they have their new member classes out in their narthex, and it is their next steps. You want to get involved in the church? That's the first thing you see when you walk into the church, a next steps wall. And on each of the next steps is the way that they grow disciples through worship, through growth, and through service. And you pick up one of those cards and it tells you how to join. You pick up one of those cards, it tells you about baptism, tells you about growing, it tells you about serving. And they have that so simple right there in front of everyone. I love this company, the guy who had the place with the nap room. His core values at his company that he sold for $100 million, it was the best place to work in Atlanta. He's a good Methodist. His core values were be positive, take initiative, and be supportive. Don't you wish everyone in your church was those three things? Why can a for-profit company make that their core values? And we have to put up with the stuff we put up with, that we tolerate. Some of our churches have started stating their core values clearly so they can hold people who don't live up to those values accountable. You've not been very supportive. You haven't been very positive in this meeting. We gave you this responsibility, Monica, and you never took initiative. But you can't hold people accountable unless you tell them what the standards are: being nice, dreaming big, paying it forward, working hard, playing hard. Because we all want the ideal United Methodist Church, don't we? One of our churches decided they would invest in big days to try and grow their worship attendance. And they did it with Black History Month. They did it with Easter. They did it with back to school. And they did it with our election. And they were able to grow their worship attendance by scheduling big days. One of our churches did a big day. It was Law Enforcement Appreciation Sunday. And it went great until they roasted pigs for lunch. If we just had donuts for communion. I got like 2 more slides that I want to get through. Are y'all tolerating me just a few more minutes? This is one of our most creative churches, a guy named Dale Locke, Community of Hope, down in Florida. It's one of our fastest growing United Methodist churches, and they take God seriously, but they don't take themselves too seriously. I'd like you to take a moment to watch this video of how they advertised one of their great sermon series called Get in the Game.
Hey, thanks for meeting with me today, guys. I think it's great. Listen, I want to remind everybody that something's really important about the series. So when we're doing this series, Get in the Game, I don't want to overdo the college, like football stuff, okay? Let's just don't overdo that. It's about getting people involved in scripture reading and understanding, learning how to hear God's voice in His Word, okay?
Sure. Okay, sounds good, man.
Well, another good meeting, guys.
Isn't that great? How can you creatively tell your story? How can you creatively create a big day? I worked with one church in North Alabama, and I said, what's the biggest day in North Alabama? They said the Iron Bowl. So they decided to have Iron Bowl Sunday, and it went great. They decided to decorate half the church for Alabama, half the church for Auburn, and things went really well until these signs showed up. One of our churches had a big Oreo Sunday. They collect 5 tons of Oreos to send to servicemen and women who miss them. Thought it was a great thing. So I just want to say to y'all, thanks for coming. Have a great week, and I'll see y'all next week. Appreciate your time and attention. I hope you got 1 or 2 things that will stimulate your creativity and allow you to think and dream great dreams for Christ in your missional hubs and for your church. Go in peace and not to pieces.